So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today we're going to be talking about the Peterborough ditch murders. These murders were carried out by one of the most evil women the UK has ever seen. I don't want to give any names. I don't think I've put her name in the title, but if I have, then I look stupid right now. Just to let you know, by the way, this case is a two-parter. This is part one. Part two will be out in the next few days, I promise. I don't know why so many of my videos have been multiple part series lately. I promise I'll try and get some single part videos out next month, but I appreciate you watching them all the same. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so that you don't miss when part two comes out in the next few days. But anyway, before we get into the case, I just want to thank our sponsor for making this video possible, Casetify. Casetify have always been my absolute favourite place to get cute yet protective phone cases. These are some of my latest favourite cases. You can get them personalised as well, which I love. Their cases have what's called Chi-Tech 2.0 technology. I hope I'm saying that right, but that basically means that they are drop protected from almost up to 10 feet. When I first heard this, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't quite believe it, so I'm gonna include a clip of me and my mum drop testing my phone. Okay, so I'm about to do a drop test of my phone. This is what it looks like before. No cracks, no scratches, nothing. This is in the ultra impact case. Are you ready? My mum's peering herself behind the camera. Are you ready? And it's completely fine. There's no cracks, no scratches, not even on the case. Wow. But one of the things I love the most about Casetify is their sustainability. Their new impact and ultra impact cases are both made of 65% recycled materials. They're also plant-based. They also arrive in 100% recyclable packaging as well. They also run a program called Recasetify, and I'd never heard of this, but this is amazing, where you can basically send in your old phone cases that you no longer use. Say it's from an old phone model that you don't have anymore, and then they can upcycle those cases and make them usable for someone else. So if you're planning on getting the new iPhone 13 when that comes out, first of all, you probably want a Casetify case to make sure your new phone is protected. But second of all, send all your old cases from your old phone into Casetify. And you'll actually get a special discount off of your next purchase if you do send in your old phone cases. Oh, and by the way, their cases are all 100% BPA free, non-toxic, and non-hazardous. And they also include an antimicrobial coating that kills 99% of bacteria that lands on your phone. That's something I never knew I needed in a phone case, but I'm so glad I've got it now. And what's more, their phone cases are actually cute as well. A lot of the time, if you want protection with your phone case, you're gonna have to sacrifice the aesthetics, but not with Casetify. You can find a cute and protective phone case. They have a huge range of designs and different ways for you to personalize your case, so there's genuinely something for everyone on there, which makes it the perfect gift as well, with Christmas coming up on us very quickly. And you guys know me, I'm not gonna do a promotion and not get you a discount. If you go to casetify.com/Eleanor, it's the link down below in the description as well. That link will automatically apply a 15% discount for you at checkout. Don't say I don't treat you. So go grab your new favourite phone case and save yourself some money while you're doing it using that link. Thanks again to Casetify for sponsoring this video. Now before we get into it, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. Just a couple of content warnings before we get into this one. This case has some very dark themes, from child neglect to domestic abuse to self-harm. So if any of that is something that you don't think you can watch right now, I completely understand. Please click out of this video and look after yourself. That's the most important thing. I'm sure I'll see you again on my channel at some point with a different case that might be a little bit more suitable for you. Anyway, with all that being said, let's just jump into the case. So this case starts out in Cambridgeshire in England in 2013, specifically in a town called Newborough in Peterborough. On the morning of March 30th, 2013, it was a Saturday morning and a man was out walking his dog along the usual route that he always took every single day through these fields when his dog ran off into a completely different field. The man didn't think much of it at first. I mean, dogs do that. They run around, they explore, they do random stuff all the time. After a while, the dog came running back, but then it went back out again to that exact same field, the exact same spot in the exact same field. And so the guy's now thinking, okay, my dog's seen something and it's trying to take me over. So he follows his dog to this drainage ditch on the end of a farmer's field. And that was when he saw something. Laying in this drainage ditch under a bridge was what seemed to be the dead body of a man. So immediately this dog walker called the police, who told him to get on the other side of the road to the body, don't go near it, and just wait for them to arrive. And when they did, they realised the true horrors of this scene. This man, this dead body, had been dressed up in a woman's black sequin dress, and he was posed in a way that was intended to humiliate him. He was on all fours with his face in the ground. The dress was hiked up over his waist, exposing all of his bottom half. So the body was recovered and taken for an autopsy, where it was confirmed that this man was a victim of homicide. He had 5 stab wounds to his chest. These stab wounds had actually pierced both of his lungs and his heart, which meant that he died instantly. So immediately, on first impressions of this crime scene, it was a lot for police to take in, and they immediately knew that whoever had done this, whoever had murdered this man, it was very personal. The killer very clearly had a lot of anger towards this man based on, well, so many different things. First of all, there was the method of killing. Stabbing is a very, dare I say, intimate way of killing someone. That's probably not the word to use, but it requires you to be very up close and personal with the victim. The killer wanted to see the look on their victim's face as they stabbed them in the chest. They did it face to face. Not to mention all of the extra care taken after the killer had already murdered the victim, just so that they could humiliate him further in death, making sure that he was exposed and that he was posed in a way that when he was found, his certain areas of his body would be on show. Another thing that was concluded from the autopsy was that this man, this murder victim, had very clearly fought for his life. There were self-defense wounds all over his arms and hands, different cuts where he'd been caught by the knife. He'd really tried to defend himself from his attacker, but the attacker must have just been too strong for him. So police very quickly got to work on this murder inquiry, but the investigators that were put on this case very quickly realised that this was going to be so difficult for them to solve. At this point, they had no identification of this man. It's not like he had a bag on him or any, ID or anything like that. This murder seemed to have taken place in the middle of nowhere, or at least his body was dumped in the middle of nowhere, somewhere where there's no passers-by, no CCTV cameras. So it's not like there were any witnesses to this. There were just no leads, really, for them to follow up on. And so they felt that the best course of action would be to start out by trying to identify this man, this murder victim. So police went back to the station and they decided to look through all of the current missing persons cases that they had going on at the moment, because maybe this man had been reported missing by his family and then they could identify him that way and match it up to one of the missing persons cases. And that was when they found a potential match in 48-year-old Kevin Lee. He was a property developer and a lettings agent based in Peterborough. Kevin Lee was happily married to his wife Christina. In fact, it was her that called the police the night before to report him missing when he failed to return home from work. Kevin had 2 children, a son named Dino and a daughter named Kiara, and he was known to be such a great father. He was so loving, so encouraging, so inspiring to his children. Kevin was such a kind-hearted and compassionate person, and this is very evident in the career that he found himself ending up in, because while yes, he was a lettings agent, he was a very specific type of landlord. He set up a company named QuickLet, and QuickLet let out rooms specifically to vulnerable people or people in need. So that's people that were homeless or people that have just come out of prison and they need to get their life back on track, people that have been kicked out of the family home for whatever reason. These people would go to their local council, tell them that they were struggling to find a home, and the council would put them in touch with Kevin Lee at QuickLet, and he would be able to rent them a room or a house. At QuickLet, they kept the vetting process for their tenants very, very brief. So, all the checks and stuff that they have to go through to be able to rent. they kept them very brief because he knew the kind of people he would be renting to. And Kevin understood that no matter who you are, everyone's always got something going on in their life, whether that was drugs, an addiction, or previous prison time. Those are the kind of things that would normally get in the way of you being able to rent a home, but not through Quicklet. He understood, and so he didn't care. He just wanted to give people a second chance in life. Kevin himself had been adopted as a child, and so for that reason, he felt he'd been given a second chance in life to have a great life and a great family, and he wanted to give other people that same opportunity that he'd had. Kevin Lee just seemed like such a wonderful soul, such a kind and generous person. But anyway, when Kevin Lee didn't return home from work on March 29th, 2013, that was when his wife Christina Lee called the police and reported him missing. But she actually wouldn't hear anything back from police until the next morning. Now, this was before they'd even found the body. They called Christina to let them know that they'd found Kevin's car, but it wasn't looking good. He was nowhere to be seen, none of his belongings were in the car, and the car itself had been set on fire and burnt out. It was found in the middle of a random field in Peterborough, somewhere that Kevin wouldn't have taken his own car. Of course, he would have never burnt out his own car. And as soon as the police that were now on the murder investigation found out about Kevin Lee's disappearance and the way that his car was found, they were pretty sure that they must have found the body of Kevin Lee. So later that day, his wife Christina was brought in to do a formal identification, and that was when it was confirmed that Kevin Lee had been murdered. And Christina was absolutely beside herself. Of course, she was so distraught because not only had she lost her husband, but he'd also been her best friend for like over 20 years now. He was actually her first ever relationship. She didn't know love without him. And when she lost him, she lost everything. And their kids lost not only their father, but also the mother that they knew. Because after this, Christina was never the same. His teenage son, Dino, had to cope without his father's words of encouragement and his support. The two of them were like best friends. I think they went go-karting together. Both of his kids, neither of their lives would ever be the same again. Kevin Lee just made such a positive impact on so many people's lives. So why would someone want to do something so heinous to him? So one of the first things police did in this investigation was they got in contact with Kevin Lee's phone network provider, and they got a copy of all of his phone records from the night that he went missing and was probably murdered. So they were looking through these phone records and they were finding that Christina had called him so many times, which of course she was so worried about him. She wanted to know where he was. And this was actually a great thing for the investigation that she did this, because every time she called his phone, they got a hit on his phone at the nearest cell tower that it was at. And that way they could see the location the phone was in every time he received one of her calls. And sure enough, the main location that this phone was in was actually where his car was later found burned out. So maybe his phone had been left in the car when the car was burnt, and maybe the phone got burnt along with the car, and maybe his body was taken elsewhere after that. So now police had a location, and they believed that Kevin Lee knew his killer, obviously because of how personal it seemed. So they figured out the best way that they could find a potential suspect was to look at his contacts list inside his phone. So they started going through every single number on this list and tracing the locations of where all these people were on the night that Kevin disappeared. And that was when they came across one woman in particular, 30-year-old Joanna Dennehy. When they looked up her location on the night that Kevin disappeared, it was found to be the exact same location, that exact same field. So the two of them had been together on the night that Kevin was murdered. So police decided to run a check on that whole cell tower in general, because it kind of was in the middle of nowhere. So if they got another hit on it, if another person was there, then they know that they were probably involved, because people don't pass through this area very often. It was just fields. And when they did, they ended up finding out that Kevin and Joanna weren't the only two people there that night. There was one other phone connection to that cell tower on that night, and when it was traced back, that phone was found to belong to a man named Gary Stretch. Well, He was called Gary Richards, but his nickname was Stretch. So now Joanna Dennehy and Gary Stretch are both prime suspects in this case. Why were they in the same location as Kevin Lee's phone and his burned out car? So police decided to run both of these suspects' names on the system, and that was when they realised Joanna and Gary were both very, very dangerous people. They both had lengthy criminal histories. In fact, Joanna Dennehy was only just released from prison a few weeks before this murder took place. But right now, police had no idea what connection they had to Kevin Lee. So police decided to take this information back to Kevin Lee's family because, of course, Joanna Dennehy was in his contact list, so it proved that he knew her to a degree. And so they took it to his family and said, look, who's Joanna? Do you know anything about this woman? And Christina said that she'd actually heard that name quite a few times before. It turned out that Joanna Dennehy was actually one of Kevin's tenants. She rented a room from him through Quicklet. But Christina told the police that as far as she was aware, Kevin and Joanna got on quite well and there were no disagreements or disputes or arguments or problems or anything. And Kevin knew that Joanna was a criminal when he allowed her to rent that room. Of course he knew. She didn't try to keep it from him. In fact, she actually told him the story of why she was in prison. Joanna Dennehy told Kevin Lee that she had been in prison for murder. But not just any murder. It was the murder of her own father. She went on to tell him that her father had actually sexually abused her, and so in self-defense, Joanna killed her own father, and she was sentenced to 8 years in prison for that. She told Kevin that because of that one act of self-defense, murdering her rapist to get him away from her, to get him off of her, it had ruined her whole life. And now she was just seen as this violent thug criminal that had a murder on her criminal record, so that meant she couldn't get any jobs. No jobs were willing to hire a murderer. None of them bothered to look into the reasons why it happened. And so she was caught in this vicious cycle. She couldn't get any money from a proper job, and so she was caught in a vicious cycle of crime and robbery and theft and pickpocketing and mugging just so that she could get by. And Kevin heard this and he felt so sorry for this woman. In fact, his heart went out to her so much that he offered Joanna Dennehy a room completely free of charge, rent-free. She could stay in a room until she got herself a job and got back on her feet. He was willing to be out of pocket to give her that second chance because he wanted her to be able to live a life after what she'd gone through. But the two of them did strike up a deal. It wasn't completely for free. In return, Joanna said that she would do a favour for Kevin. Obviously, with the nature of his business, he's renting rooms to a lot of criminals and to a lot of people that can't afford rent. And so when they didn't pay their rent or they refused to move out when he tried to evict them, there was nothing he could really do. That was until he met Joanna Dennehy, because Kevin himself, he would go to these houses and these rooms and be like, come on, move out, you're not paying your way, and they'd just be like, no, no, I'm not leaving. But Joanna, on the other hand, she was a lot more intimidating than Kevin was. She was a lot more scary than he was. She was a lot more threatening than he was. And so she agreed that if she stayed in this room for free, rent-free, then she would help him kick out these people that refused to leave, or she would make them pay in some way. And this is where Gary Stretch comes in as well, because he helped Joanna a lot of the time. Joanna herself was very intimidating looking. She had like face tattoos. She knew all the right things to say to scare the living daylights out of someone. But Gary Stretch was on a whole other level. This man was 7 feet tall, over 7 feet tall. That's insane. And he was quite stocky as well. Like, he was a massive guy. Massive, massive, massive. Like, the kind of guy where it's like one punch and it's over for you. And so the two of them together, they would go to all these different properties of Kevin Lee's and be like, look, you're paying or something's gonna happen. I don't know exactly what they would say, but they would certainly threaten them. Bear in mind, a lot of these people that they would go and threaten are also hardened criminals. Like, people that have been in prison for a very long time. And the fact that they were scared of Joanna and Gary Stretch says a lot about them, I think. So this was the deal that Gary, Joanna, and Gary Stretch all had. And now it was seeming as though that deal had ended in the barbaric murder of their boss. But how had this happened? Police knew that they needed to go and speak with Joanna and Gary right now, and so they went straight down to Joanna Dennehy's room that she rented from Kevin Lee at 38 Byfield. So police went down there, and Joanna actually shared this house with 2 other people, I believe, or 3 other people, but when they knocked on the door, Joanna wasn't there. Actually, no one was there. They knocked quite a few times and no one came to the door. But because this investigation was so serious, I mean, it was a murder investigation, and they had reason to believe that Joanna was potentially a murderer. And so they kicked this door down and they went straight inside. They were going to try and find her, Gary, anyone. So they started running upstairs, running in all these different rooms of the property. And then some of the officers went out through the back door into the back garden. And that was when they found a mattress covered in blood. So immediately police are certain that they have just stumbled across the crime scene. Joanna Dennehy must be the murderer, and this must be where she murdered Kevin Lee, at her house on her mattress. Maybe she killed him in her home and then later on went and dumped the body out in that field and then moved the mattress outside into her back garden. And so they collected this mattress and sent it off to the lab to be forensically tested. But it was these forensic tests that threw a real spanner in the works of this investigation, because when a blood test was done, it was found that this wasn't Kevin Lee's blood. But in that case, whose blood was this? Could it have been Joanna's as part of this whole altercation? So police tried to get in contact with Joanna's different housemates. I don't know what happened with 2 of them. I think they got in contact with them and they weren't even staying at that house at that point in time. But then there was a 3rd housemate named John Chapman. Joanna and John Chapman weren't very close. I mean, they only lived in a house share. They both rented single rooms and they didn't really talk to each other outside of that. It wasn't like they were friends that chose to live together. They just both happened to rent rooms in that same house. But when police tried to get in contact with John Chapman, he didn't answer his phone. In fact, they didn't know where he was at all. They couldn't locate him. And so now they had that on top of everything else that they were dealing with. This was very quickly becoming a very, very confusing and scary investigation to be a part of. So now, 30-year-old Joanna Dennehy and 47-year-old Gary Stretch are considered very dangerous people, and it seemed that they were on the run. And by the looks of things, they were leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. Things just went wrong wherever they were. Someone turned up murdered, someone was missing. What was going on with these 2 people? So let's talk a little bit more about this duo, shall we? Well, mainly Joanna Dennehy, because Gary Stretch, there's actually not that much about his life on the internet. He's quite mysterious in that way. No one knows what's going on with him. But Joanna Christine Dennehy herself was born in August of 1982 in St Albans, Hertfordshire. The family later moved to Harpenden, which is a small town in St Albans, and she was raised there by her mother Kathleen and her father Kevin. Her family worked very hard for what they had. They weren't a rich family by any means. They were just a very average working class family. I mean, her father was a security guard, her mother worked in retail, and 2 years after Joanna was born, her parents had a second child, a daughter named Maria, and they were a very happy, normal family. By all accounts, Joanna had the most normal childhood. She enjoyed all the same things any other kid her age did, going out to the playground and playing outside with her sister. She was just a very happy, easygoing child. Although her mother did say that she was quite a sensitive child, she was quite emotional, very clingy and needy. She was just a very loving child. You could tell that she really had that sensitive side to her. She was such a caring little girl. I actually have a quote here from her mother about this. She said, "If Joanna stood on a worm or something, she would be really upset. She was a loving girl." Joanna Dennehy was literally the epitome of that saying, she couldn't hurt a fly, when she was younger. As she was growing up, Joanna was doing really well in school. She was really well behaved and polite, and her mother was just very proud of the young woman that she was growing up to be. She had a lot of friends. She didn't struggle socially at all. She was quite an outgoing girl, and her teachers described her as a nice girl. But all of this would change when Joanna hit her teenage years, and she became almost the complete opposite of the child that she'd been all her life. All of a sudden, she was not well behaved. She wasn't polite. She was mean. She was rude. Her whole personality just changed, and she no longer found joy in the things that she once liked. And all of a sudden, she wanted to just skip school and go drink alcohol and take drugs all day. Well, I say that, but she also started doing those things in school as well. She would like sneak vodka in her bag and get drunk at school. She started stealing from shops. She was getting into trouble with the police for all kinds of different antisocial behaviour, whether that was theft or just being drunk and rowdy on the streets, starting fights. When she did come into school, which was not often, by the way, but when she did, all of the students in the school seemed to have really differing opinions of Joanna. It really depended who you asked. Some of them loved her, some of them hated her and saw her as the devil. So with some of them, especially the boys, this was mainly the boys, she was funny, she was charming, she was charismatic, she was funny, flirty, a good friend. But with others, she was horrible, she was mean, she was a bully, she was violent, aggressive, rude. Like, it was like two completely different human beings in one body. Joanna was often described as manipulative. She would manipulate anyone and everyone to get her own way, and when she didn't get her own way, on the off chance, I mean, she was very good at getting her own way, mind you, but when she didn't, all hell would break loose. She would throw into a fit of rage. She would threaten people with violence and fights. She would tell people to go kill themselves. She would even say, like, I'll help you do it if you want. She would have violent outbursts. She would hit things, throw things in school, and then 10 minutes later, she'd be fine. It'd be like none of that had just happened and she'd be a completely different Joanna. And she really didn't seem to care about the effects that all of this behaviour was having on the people around her. Like all her manipulation, her bullying, all the rudeness. Like it was affecting everyone. All her friends, all her family, and she just didn't care. If anything, she actually seemed to get a kick out of it. She enjoyed it. And all of her family were just devastated watching this happening to Joanna. I mean, they wanted to change her and help her so badly, but she just wasn't receptive to it. She was just becoming a horrible person, a person that they didn't know. Her sister Maria said, "There was a girl we loved who turned into a monster." But things only seemed to get even worse for Joanna Dennehy when she turned 14 years old and she got into her first ever relationship. But this relationship was with an adult man. This boyfriend was 20-year-old John Trainer, and I have no idea what a 20-year-old man sees in a 14-year-old girl, but for some reason this relationship began, although John Trainer is adamant that the two of them did not have sex until Joanna turned 16 years old and hit the legal age of consent. Whether you believe that is a different thing. Anyway, the two of them got together, and of course, Joanna's parents had a huge problem with this. I think every parent in the world would. It caused so many arguments in the household. Of course, her family only wanted what was best for her, but a 14-year-old girl is not going to see that. 14-year-old girls think that they know everything, and they think that their parents are just being mean to them. But no, her parents saw what was going on here and they thought it was very weird. So anyway, there's arguments in the household every single day until one day Joanna just doesn't come home. She'd packed up all her things and left. She'd run away with her 20-year-old boyfriend. But the thing is, they didn't have anywhere to go, and so they ran away together to be homeless. They slept rough for a while. They were sleeping just on benches or in train stations, bus stations. Eventually they got a tent to sleep in, and this was going on for like a couple of years. They were homeless for at least a full year, and surprisingly enough, Joanna didn't mind it. If anything, she kind of liked the experience of it, but John hated it. He hated every second of it. Then finally, after a while, the couple were offered a council house in Luton, and so they took it and they moved into this flat. By now, Joanna was about 16 years old, and some major changes were about to happen in her life and in this relationship, because when she turned 17, she fell pregnant. And surprisingly enough, Joanna was a very sensible and responsible mother. She decided to quit alcohol, she quit every and any drug, she stopped smoking. She wanted the best for this baby. She was going to care for this baby as best as she could. And it looked like Joanna was going to be an amazing mother. She was determined to give this baby a good life. And eventually she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Cheyenne. However, when Cheyenne was born, all of this changed. Joanna went right back to her old life of partying, drugs, alcohol, going out all night, every night, not coming home, leaving John to look after Cheyenne, like their newborn baby girl. She would sleep through the day. She never really changed Cheyenne's nappy or bathed her or fed her or anything. It was John doing absolutely everything for the first few years of Cheyenne's life. And he said that he would just watch, like he would be sat there on the sofa holding the baby, and he would watch as Joanne was putting back 2 litres of vodka in a day. It's a wonder she never drank herself to death at that rate. Like, surely that's alcohol poisoning kind of levels. As Cheyenne got a little bit older, Joanna got slightly more involved in her life. Don't get me wrong, she still was not a good mother at all, but Cheyenne has some fond memories of her mother getting a paddling pool out for her and her friends in the summer. She'd come out and make mud pies with them. She said that her mother was just like a big kid. But then there were some not so fond memories, like Joanna would teach her 2-3-year-old daughter how to wrestle. She would like play fight with her, although, you know, this is a toddler. It's just not really the kind of thing you should be teaching a 2-3-year-old girl, is it? And it wasn't until Cheyenne got a little bit older that she realised what her mum was really like. You know, all the drinking, all the drugs, partying, never coming home, not until the early hours of the morning sometimes. A lot of Cheyenne's memories of her mother are not that great. I mean, she just used to sit on the sofa and read books, or she would go out for a walk and leave Cheyenne in the house by herself. Sometimes, this is a toddler, by the way. Joanne just really was not a good mother. And she wasn't a good girlfriend either to John. When she would go out and get drunk, she would come home and she would be so violent with John. She would throw things at him, she would punch him, kick him. Often while her baby daughter was in the room as well. Cheyenne would witness this. Joanna even started cheating on John quite a lot with multiple different people. She would literally just go out, get drunk, take drugs, and sleep around. And he knew that this was going on, but he just loved her too much, and they had a family now. He didn't want to break that over Joanna cheating on him. And she had like this spell over him that like she could do whatever she wanted to him and he wasn't going to leave her. He was just so attached to her. But as he found out about more and more and more of Joanna's affairs, he was getting more and more angry and upset, and he was so torn that he didn't want to break up his family, but he also wanted to be respected by Joanna. He tried to make it work for a little while until eventually, after 5 years with Joanna, he just left her. Joanna moved back to St. Albans. I think John kept Cheyenne with him, obviously, well, hopefully. But John never got over Joanna. For the next year of his life, she was all he thought about, to the point where eventually he couldn't take it anymore and he went back to St. Albans and begged for her back. And she took him back. She took him back. She was the one that was cheating on this man, abusing this man, and she was the one that took him back. He was the one begging for her. They tried to make it work a second time, and Joanna quickly fell pregnant again. So they were having a second baby, and she did the exact same thing she did the first time. She was, you know, straight edge during her pregnancy. She didn't want anything, drugs, alcohol, nothing. This is a severely addicted woman as well. She was addicted to so many different substances, and she literally just cut it all off cold turkey every time she got pregnant. But then the exact same thing happened again. As soon as this baby was born, she didn't care anymore. She was back on it all. She didn't care for the baby. She still wasn't caring for Cheyenne. In fact, John said that the second Joanna Dennehy returned home from the hospital with her newborn baby, their second child together, she went and got stoned. There's literally pictures. They were taking pictures because it was the baby's first day on the earth. And so they're all taking pictures together. And Joanna is so high in these pictures. Like, she left her newborn baby with her boyfriend to go and smoke weed. That was her priorities here. When she's meeting her new baby for the first time, she would rather go and do drugs. This whole time, by the way, I haven't mentioned it because I don't know the exact details, but Joanna's been in and out of prison for different things. Theft, drugs charges, weapons charges. She owned a dangerous dog at one point, something like that. Ever since she was 14 and her and John ran away from home, she's literally been out of like youth offender programs, and then when she became an adult, she was in and out of jail. And that's because she had no education. Of course, she left school, she literally ran away before she managed to complete her GCSEs. So that meant she had no qualifications, she couldn't get any jobs, not that she was trying to anyway, and so she had no income. And so the only way for her to get money to be able to pay for food and things like that was from robbing people, robbing stores. She was on benefits, but the benefits system in this country is naff and it's never enough for anyone. So she did need extra money, and that was how she got it. She'd also, along the way, developed some very destructive habits, and that included very severe self-harm. Now, I do want to give you a warning before I start talking about this, because I know how upsetting this topic can be for some people. I'll get Editor Jack to put a timestamp on screen if you want to skip forward, if you don't want to hear about anything like this. I won't go into too much detail, there won't be any visuals or anything like that, don't worry. But still, I just know that the topic itself can be a bit too much sometimes, so please do skip ahead. Look after yourself, by the way. So anyway, I don't know when the self-harming actually began for Joanna. There's no record of her doing it for the first time or anything like that. But she was doing it for years and years and years, all the way through her teenage years and into adulthood. And she would do it for different reasons as well. So probably the most common reason that people self-harm is as a coping mechanism to cope with overwhelming or very emotional, distressing situations. It's often used for the purpose of a release or even a distraction from whatever's going on in their life. And Joanna did struggle with her mental health a lot. I don't know exactly what she had. I don't know if she was ever actually diagnosed with anything, but from her behaviours and different things that people that have known her said, it's very clear that she was struggling with something. And she did use self-harm a lot of the time as a coping mechanism for these mental health issues. But as we get further into the case, I'm skipping ahead slightly here, but I just kind of want to get all the talk of self-harm out of the way while we're here, and then we can just move past the topic. But later on in life, she began self-harming during sex or during masturbation. It seems she developed this fetish for pain and blood and violence. This time it wasn't to deal with her feelings, it was for pleasure. It was like a kink of hers. Joanna was very much into BDSM, rough sex, a whole plethora of different kinks, quite outlandish ones actually. She actually walked around a lot of the time with handcuffs attached to the belt loop on her jeans just so that she always had them. We'll talk a little bit more about Joanna's sex life and all of her different kinks and stuff like that later on in the video. But self-harm was a big part of that, actually. It was a big part of Joanna's life in general, and do be careful if you Googled this case, because one of the most famous pictures of Joanna Dennehy is her showing her self-harm scars, so be careful if that's something that you don't want to see. Don't Google her. Anyway, in 2009, John Trainer recalled a very pivotal moment in his and Joanna's relationship when she threatened him with a knife in front of their kids. She took this 6-inch blade and she's like waving it around, she's shouting, she's carrying on, and then she stabs it into the ground right in front of where John Trainer and both of their children are standing. And as she plunged that knife into the floor, she screamed, "Oh, I could just kill someone." And in that moment, John Trainer had this realization. It was no longer about him. It was no longer about his feelings. No matter how much he loved Joanna, no matter how much he wanted to stay around her, he now had to do what was right for his kids. She was waving around this knife in front of his 2 children, and he knew that he had to get them out of that situation, because this could very easily go one step further and it would be life-threatening for all of them. And so very bravely, John Trainer grabbed the kids and moved up north. He left Joanna Dennehy and she was alone now. And she was homeless for quite a while after this because they had to give the house back. Again, she was in and out of prison quite a lot. She kind of slowed down with all of her crimes and stuff when her 2 children were born, but after this point she didn't really have anything going for her in life. So she was in and out of prison, drugs charges, weapons charges, theft, burglary, this, that. She didn't see her kids for years after this, if ever. I don't actually know if she ever saw them again. She just kind of put that part of her life behind her, just forgot that she ever had a family. On one of Joanna's releases from prison for another one of these charges, she was sent to hospital for, I believe, SH injuries. And while she was there, she was actually diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. She was put on medication to help her deal with the symptoms of this, but the doctor that assessed her noted down that he was specifically more concerned with the amount of psychopathic traits he saw in Joanna Dennehy. She was impulsive, she lacked any kind of empathy or guilt or consciousness or understanding of the feelings of other people. She was irresponsible. She didn't think about her future or the consequences of her actions. She was never thinking that far ahead. She just wanted what she wanted in the moment. She was angry, violent, full of rage, and she had this overwhelming urge and need for power and dominance and control over people. If she was not in control, she was out of that situation. And it wasn't long before Joanna Dennehy was back in prison, this time for a 14-week sentence for theft. And that's what brings us back to the timeline, actually, because after her release, Joanna was homeless, and that was when she went to the council, asked for help finding a house, and they put her in contact with Quicklep. They put her in contact with Kevin Lee. And that's when she told Kevin her story, that her father raped her and so she murdered him in self-defense, and that's why she'd been in prison for 8 years. But now we know that's a lie. Not one part of this story was true. She hadn't killed anyone. Her father hadn't sexually assaulted her. Well, there's no evidence of it anyway. Her family actually seemed like such a nice, normal, genuine family, and it's such a shame that Joanna came from them. She made up this whole lie about her father and about her killing him and about her going to prison and now being stuck in this life of crime when she's not actually a criminal, all for sympathy. All because she was hoping that it might get her a cheaper rate on her rent. And Jesus Christ, did it work, because Kevin Lee, bless his soul, he gave her the room for free when he really shouldn't have. But not only that, he would give her gifts and money, and he felt so sorry for this woman that he wanted to help her get back on her feet in any way that he possibly could. And because of Kevin Lee, Joanna Dennehy felt like she was in a good position now. She had the house, she had money, she had stable relationships around her, and so she decided to take herself off of her antisocial personality disorder medication. And this would end with disastrous consequences. After a while of Joanna Dennehy living in Kevin Lee's property, a lot of people around him started to believe that maybe he had some feelings for Joanna. Like I said, he would go and visit her a lot. He would give her gifts. He would give her money. He actually gave her enough money to buy a car. So he essentially bought her a car, and eventually his friend's suspicions were confirmed when Kevin told them everything. That he was kind of seeing Joanna, even though he was married to Christina. Well, to be honest, it was more of just like a sexual thing, but without the sex right now. So they would have like sexual conversations, they would text each other things. Kevin even told his friends that Joanna had said to him that she wanted to dress him up and rape him. And he found her view of sex and intimacy very intriguing. Joanna's doctors reported that she had what's called paraphilia sadomasochism, which is the urge to combine things like blood and pain, violence, humiliation, fear with sex. And this was something that Kevin had never really experienced before. His wife wasn't into anything like that, and so he'd never, experimented with anything like that. And so he found Joanna so intriguing. And his friends said that he was just very, very caught up in all of this. His friend Dave Church said that the two of them would often engage in what he called extreme sex. Bear in mind, this was all behind Kevin's wife's back. And that is exactly where Kevin Lee was believed to be heading on March 29th, 2013, the day that he went missing. It's believed that him and Joanna were going to meet up at one of his vacant properties for sex. And now he was found murdered. But let's think back to the way that he was found. He was found in a dress, in a position that was intended to humiliate him. And police know that he was with Joanna Dennehy and Gary Stretch on the day that he died. but it seems they've both gone on the run. Not to mention the crime scene that they left behind at Joanna Dennehy's own home, that mattress covered in blood, and they have no idea whose blood this is at this point in time. Was it possible that Joanna Dennehy had another victim? I mean, it was looking like it. And then there was also Joanna's missing roommate, 56-year-old John Chapman. Where was he? I think I actually forgot to give background on John Chapman earlier on in the case, so I'll just do it now. John Chapman was actually an ex-Royal Navy veteran. He served in the Falklands War, and then when he was released from the Navy, he fell into a lot of addictions. He abused a lot of substances and ended up as an alcoholic. He took all kinds of different drugs, and this left him in a very vulnerable position to the point where he then had to start renting through Quicklet. And he'd actually lived in 38 Byfield, the place that he lived with Joanna Dennehy. He'd lived there quite a bit longer than she had. She joined after he did. But now, he was nowhere to be found. And police are becoming more and more worried about this situation, literally by the second. And so they decided to launch a full-scale manhunt for Joanna Dennehy and Gary Stretch. And that's what we'll talk more about in part 2. Thank you so much for watching this. I really appreciate it. Thanks again to Case25 for sponsoring this video. Remember, if you want to get 15% off of your new favourite phone case, you can go to case2fi.com/Eleanor. The link is down below in the description as well if you just want to click through that way. And that link will automatically apply a 15% discount at checkout. You are so welcome, by the way. A huge thank you to all of my channel members for supporting me and helping decide the cases that I cover, especially my tier 2 members whose names are all on screen right now. If you want to become a channel member, you can click the link to do so in the description, or you can click the join button if you're on a desktop. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a thumbs up down below because that would really help me out. If you want to subscribe, there'll be a link to do so right here, or if you want to subscribe to my second channel, I post a lot more light-hearted content over there. You can click that one to subscribe. Or if you want to watch another true crime video, there'll be a playlist on screen right now. Bye bye!